Alex, I want to talk about land tax. We're going to talk about something that everybody else has already talked about for the past few weeks in the pre-modern world. It's the banning of land tax. I want to start just by talking about what made land tax so great. You and I knew about land tax from back in the day.
It was fairly major news when they reprinted it right when we were playing, and was it
Fourth edition?
Fourth edition?
I believe it was fourth edition. But we both knew it as a cool card. I don't think we realized how powerful that card could be, especially when combined with some of the other cards that were also released towards the end of our playing days, like Scroll Rack and Mox Diamond. So I'm going to go through what makes that combo so powerful. And I'm going to do that by going through an article that was written by one Samuel H. Black. So Samuel H. Black is a pro Magic player who recently started playing pre-modern. I think he started playing some old school stuff too. And he's just whooping everybody with his pro MagicTheGathering player skills. This is his website. He has a podcast called Drafting Archetypes. He's a writer for Hipsters of the Coast. This is one of the articles that I'm going to go through today, was written by him for Hipsters of the Coast. He also does coaching for a fee, and he's a game design consultant too. So you can hire him for coaching. If you don't know how to build decks, get a little bit of money you want to spend with Sam, who'll tell you how to build a good deck. If you're a game designer and you want to hire him for consulting, contact him at samuelhblack@gmail.com. So he wrote this article called Breaking Pre-Modern. And the article is really about his melding of the land tax Scroll Rack Mox Diamond deck into the Phyrexian Dreadnought deck. So he just took like the two most powerful current decks in the pre-modern format and squished them together. That's kind of what he talks about in this article. Today, I'm just going to cover the first half of the article where he just goes through the land tax Scroll Rack Mox Diamond trio, what makes these cards so powerful, and what other things you can combine with those three cards to make probably like the best controlled deck in the pre-modern format until land tax was banned. So land tax is an enchantment, originally an uncommon one from Legends. And during your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So it's kind of like under the right circumstances, when paired with the right cards, an ancestral recall every turn.
Yeah. 1 mana for a draw 3. It has to be lands, but
has to be lands. But in addition to that, it enables, multicolored decks. You could just put 1 to 2 copies of different basic lands in your decks. And if you have a land text out, you could just go get 1 of each, and then you have your 3 mana.
Helps you with your mana fixing for sure.
Land text a second time, then you can get all 5 colors. So this was always a good card. But when this next card was printed, it became a great card. Scroll Rack. Scroll Rack was printed in Tempest originally. We saw this card when it came out. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Never did anything with it. Scroll Rack is an artifact reprinted in Commander Legends and the list. Casting cost 2 colorless. You can pay 1 colorless and tap it, and then you choose any number of cards in your hand. So let's say you have land tax out. You have fewer lands than your opponent. You go get 3 lands. If you have Scroll Rack in play, you can activate it, set those 3 lands aside, and then put an equal number of cards from the top of your library into your hand. So draw 3. Then put the card set aside in this way on top of your library in any order. What makes these so powerful together? So I'm just going to read what Sam Black wrote, because he describes really well how they synergize. If you have land tax and fewer lands than your opponent, you get to search for 3 lands, put them in your hand, as the card says. If you also have Scroll Rack, you can put those cards and any other cards you have in your hand that you don't want back on top of your deck and draw that many cards. Then if you still have fewer lands than your opponent during the next turn, you can search your library to get those same lands back in your hand, then shuffle away the other cards you don't want. This basically changes land tax from searching for 3 lands to drawing 3 cards, except, like we just mentioned a moment ago, You also get specific basic lands if you want them instead of random draws. So you can use them, to facilitate your 5-color deck. In order to get land tax, you need to have fewer lands than your opponent. So that's one issue with this deck. That's when something like Mox Diamond comes into play. It's a rare from Stronghold. It is reserve list, so it's never been reprinted, and it's become increasingly more expensive. You can get them for like 400, 500, 600 bucks nowadays, depending on the condition. Casting cost is 0 colorless. When Mox Diamond comes into play, you choose and discard a land card, or you sacrifice Mox Diamond. You can tap to add 1 mana of any color in your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana source. So with Mox Diamond in your deck, you now have a mana source, an additional mana source you can use to play spells without land. So those 3 cards really form the engine of the deck. Land tax, Scroll Rack, Mox Diamond. There are other critical players to the land tax, Scroll Rack, Mox Diamond trio. I'm going to start going through some of those. The first is Enlightened Tutor. It really helps you assemble your combo. So it's instant speed, 1 white mana. You search your library for an artifact or an enchantment card, and you reveal that card. Shuffle your library, and then put the card on top of it. It helps you get any part of that 3-card combo that you need to get this card draw engine running. Swords to Plowshares. I'm not going to pull up Swords to Plowshares. Everybody knows what that does. It's 1 white, remove target creature from the game. Sam calls this arguably the best removal spell ever made. I'm in agreement with that. 2 other great things about Enlightened Tutor and Swords of Plowshares, besides the fact that they're just great cards and they do excellent things. They only cost 1 mana, which is critical when you're running this deck and you want it to run on as little mana as possible so you can consistently trigger land tax. Undiscovered Paradise is another great card. Undiscovered Paradise is a rare from Visions. This is a reserve list. It's a land. You can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool at the beginning of your next untap phase. Return Undiscovered Paradise to your hand. So I love this card. I love it even outside of like land tax decks. What does Sam Black say? It allows you to use extra mana without having extra lands in play. When your land tax checks how many lands you have, it's going to be back in your hand. So using Undiscovered Paradise on first turn to play land tax means that if your opponent wants to have even a single land in play, you'll get to use your land tax. So this is great to like...
Yeah, it works so well with land tax, yeah.
Like imagine starting the game with like a basic land in your hand, a Mox Diamond, an Undiscovered Paradise, and a land tax. Come on. It also gives you an extra source of 5-colored mana in your deck. So adding Undiscovered Paradise along with Mox Diamond gives you 8 sources of 5-colored mana in your deck. 4 of those sources you can tutor for. So there's redundancy there too. Given how many cards you see, this makes it reasonable to play cards of any color and expect to cast them eventually. If you want to cast them early, you might also want a single basic land of the color needed to cast them, which gives you a 9th source, but it also means that land tax can find that color of mana. This brings you to a reliable 13 sources. So Undiscovered Paradise, great for obvious reasons. Gaia's Blessing is another one that he mentions, another one that he's put into his versions of this deck. Uncommon from Weatherlight, reprints and time shifted Eternal Masters Dominaria. Another low casting cost card, 1 colorless, 1 green. It's a sorcery. Target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from his or her graveyard into his or her library. Draw a card. If Gaia's Blessing is put into your graveyard from your library, shuffle your graveyard into your library. You can imagine why this is going to be great in a deck like this where you're drawn a bunch of cards. Because he says if you include Gaia's Blessing, you don't have to add an inferior variant of a spell if you want more than 4 of that spell. You can simply use Gaia's Blessing to cast that spell more than 4 times. That's a very obvious reason to put this card into your decks that I never really fully took advantage of. When Gaia's Blessing first came out, I'm like, okay, great. Sideboard card for Millstone decks, of course, but that's not the best way to use this card. If you have cards like Swords to Plowshares in your deck, you put it in your deck because you think it's the best removal in the format, you're limited to 4 copies. With Gaia's Blessing, you're no longer limited to 4 copies of that card.
Yeah. yeah, great synergy with Swords to Plowshares. Like, I mean, not because of what the spell does, but just because of, how efficient and low casting cost it is.
He says, Swords to Plowshares is so much better at what it does than any other card that I don't want to play other removal. I just want to keep casting Swords to Plowshares, but you can only play 4, so you need Gaia's Blessing to use them multiple times. Now, the downside to that, this plan of just putting Gaia's Blessing in so you can replay the best spells, is that they just get shuffled back into your library. But in this deck, like I said, it's not such a problem if you just have to shuffle the card you want back into your library, because you're going to see it pretty soon. If you can keep consistently triggering land tax, you're going to get back around to it. And then another key component, I got a few more to discuss. So outside of that trio of cards, he brings up this list of other cards that you're probably going to want to put into a land tax deck. This other key component is a card that we never played with, because we weren't really playing at this point any longer. Gush. It was printed in Mercadian Masks as a common. And this is the card that I need to start working into any pre-modern decks that I play with, because this is an incredibly powerful card that is not banned and not restricted in pre-modern. And it's pretty much now the only format where this card isn't either banned or restricted. Banned in Legacy, banned in Pauper, restricted in Vintage, legal in Commander and Oathbreaker, but these are singleton formats. So if you want to play for a Gush, play pre-modern, people. Take advantage of this card in pre-modern. It is 4 colorless, 1 blue instant. You may return 2 islands you control to their owner's hand instead of paying Gush's mana cost. Draw 2 cards. What does Sam Black say about Gush in his deck? Gush is amazing in this archetype because it makes your other cards work when you don't have land tax. And it lets you play extra lands. This is great. To lure your opponent into playing extra lands. Once they've taken the bait, then you get to go back to 2 lands to trigger land tax.
That's a good call. Yeah, because they're trying to stay, low land so that you can't do your thing. But once they see you playing more lands, they're like, okay, we have some breathing room.
That's what the intelligent land tax opponent does. They try to work with minimal mana. They try to not trigger land tax because they know if they trigger land tax a few times in a row, they're in serious trouble. But yes, you could play some lands and they're like, okay, I'm free. I'm free to play another basic land. They play it. You gush the islands back, trigger land tax again. I got to start putting this in a bunch of blue decks just because it's good. It's a great card. I mean, you see a card that's restricted or banned in every other format. You're playing a format where it's not restricted or banned. Maybe you should play 4 of.
And it looks fun to build around and to play, come up with different ways to use it.
One more card. We never played with this at all because we were not playing at all when this was printed. Prophecy Foil. It's an uncommon from Prophecy. Reprints in Ultimate Masters and a dual deck. Its casting cost is 2 colorless, 2 blue. It's an instant. You may discard an island card and another card rather than pay this spell's mana cost, counter target spell. So it is a pitch card. I don't think we've talked about the pitch cycle. We didn't make it to the pitch cycle in Prophecy yet. We talked about the Alliance's pitch cycle. We talked about the Mercadian Mass pitch cycle. We learned about that not that long ago. We haven't made it to Prophecy yet. We're aware of some cards in Prophecy, but we haven't really gone through that set in a very comprehensive manner. This is quite a steep price to pay for a free spell. I'll put free in quotes because it's not really free to have to toss away resources. You have to discard an island card and another card. So this is beyond what most pitch spells require of you. But as Sam Black says, once you're playing Gush and land tax, Foil is an incredible card because you're looking for ways to convert these extra cards into meaningful game actions without using too much mana. Nothing's really better at doing that than a free counterspell. You may discard an island card and another card. You're land taxing, you're filling your hands with lands. You can pitch them to Foil. You can counterspell without having to play more lands. You can use the lands that you draw from land tax to power this spell. With foil added, you have the bulk of your 60 cards. So as Sam said, all the cards above follow as logically necessary from the premise. Mox Diamond is the best card in Premodern. That's what he believes. And land tax Scroll Rack is the best way to use it and the best card draw engine. I want to play these cards. You have very little room for whatever your deck actually does. So that brings you to a deck like this. Okay, this is great. You're going to draw through your whole deck. You're going to be countering and Swords to Plowsharing things like crazy. As you're drawing through your deck, you're going to you're going to reshuffle things back in from your graveyard into your deck. But you can't just keep doing that forever. You have to end the game. How do you actually kill your opponent with this thing? There are a few iterations that I've come across. There are multiple people that I've seen play this deck in Premodern. They're called parfait decks, usually. At some point, we have to start doing some research, figure out like where these parfait decks came from, why in the world they're called parfait decks. I tried to look a little bit into the history of parfait decks, and the earliest ones I came across aren't really anything like the parfait decks I'm seeing now in Premodern. I think the earliest one I came across was like a white weenie deck that did use land tax and Scroll Rack to generate a card draw engine, but then it was just to like draw a bunch of like white 1/1 and 2/2s and just stomp your opponent. So it's way different than like the really serious control based decks that I see now. Kind of a tangent. How do you kill your opponent? What do you do with this framework? Sam used the rest of the space to build a control deck. He played 4 counter spells in addition to the foils, a variety of silver bullets for Enlightened Tutor to let me deal with whatever I thought my opponents might have, which led to this deck. So silver bullets like Phyrexian Furnace, if he's playing a graveyard deck, he can tutor for that with Enlightened Tutor. Humility is right here. This is the card that what makes all creatures 1/1 and eliminates all of their activated abilities. So if he's dealing with a creature-based deck, he can tutor for Humility. It's an enchantment. He has Engineered Plagues in his sideboard, another enchantment that can get rid of creatures. He can Enlighten Tutor for that. So these are his silver bullets. There might be some other silver bullets in here that I'm not recognizing. And then his win con. He just has 1 win con, Spontaneous Generation. So Sam Black, if you play against him in this deck, he's just going to annoy the shit out of you. He's going to draw 75 different cards every turn, even though there's only 60 cards in the deck. He's still going to somehow manage to draw at least 75 cards every turn. He's going to counter every spell you try to cast. He's going to Swords to Plowshare every creature that you play. He's going to replay all of his Swords to Plowshares 25 different times. And then he's eventually going to cast a Spontaneous Generation when he has 135 cards in his hand, even though he's only playing a 60 card deck. And that's going to put 135 1/1 green sapling creature tokens into play. And then you're dead.
And then you're dead.